In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use a ruling pen. This is a very old school tool, but it still has a lot of very useful purposes and even today. So let's just say, for example, you paint a gouache floral design or a paisley or something like that, and you want to make stripes or geometrics or plaids to match it in your custom colors. So you can use this with any kind of a liquid paint, so acrylic, watercolor, gouache, plaka, a variety of mediums, even metallic inks. So I've prepared my paper ahead of time. I'm using a lightweight Bristol paper, so it's smooth, and I've drawn pencil lines using a mechanical pencil. So any kind of a very thin, hard pencil is good. So draw your pencil lines very lightly, and it's very important to measure very accurately, because that's what we're going to go by in order to get a really good result. I've also taped my paper to the table using white artist tape. This is a good type of tape because it's not too tacky and it doesn't remove the surface of your paper when you're finished. Now, it's also important to work on a very smooth surface. I'm working on a glass table today, but if you have like Formica or something smooth, granite, marble, just don't work on like a rough, like a wood or any kind of a rubber mat that has cut marks or anything like that, because it will affect the quality of your lines. The other important tool to have on hand is a steel ruler with a cork backing. This cork backing actually raises the metal from the surface of the paper just slightly. And if you don't have a cork backed steel edge, you can also just add masking tape to the back, not all the way to the edge, just in the center. 1 or 2 layers of masking tape will then elevate the steel edge. I prefer steel over aluminum, plastic, or wood because it's very smooth and hard, and it certainly doesn't have any nicks in it that may be caused from previously using it for cutting. So the next thing to do is mix your paint colors. And this is gouache, and it has a little bit of water added to it. So it's better to start a little thicker because you can always add more water, whereas if it's too thin, then you're not going to be able to thicken it up again. So the first thing I want to do is adjust the ruling pen. The ruling pen has a bottom side, this is the flat side, and a top side, that's the curved side, and it has an adjustment screw. So I'm going to want to adjust this so it's about a 32nd of an inch, somewhere between a 64th and a 32nd. And you can gauge that, if you're not familiar with it, on the small end of your ruler. Now, when you look at other videos of ruling pen demonstrations, you'll see that a lot of artists actually dip the pen into the paint. I highly recommend against this. This is not the way I was taught to do it. Anytime there's paint on the outside of the ruling pen, then it's very likely that you're going to get blobs and unevenness in your line. So this is my important tip, is to take a brush, and any size brush is okay, and you're going to dip it into the paint, and then you're going to load it into, just gently dab it onto the side and let gravity pull the paint down. As you add a few more drops, it will naturally just drop to the bottom. Now I can already tell that my paint's a little too thick because it's not dropping down very quickly. So I can shake it a little bit and get it down, and I can try it out on the side here, and I can see it's not coming out very easily, which means that my paint's too thick. So I'm going to start over again. I'm going to dip it in my water and just rinse it off. And then it's good to have paper towels nearby so that you can dry it off. You can see that there's water inside of the pen right now. So I'm going to dry it off with my paper towels and make sure that all the water has been removed. So I'm going to go back now to my paint, and I'm going to put a little bit of gouache into another section of my palette. so that I don't ruin my whole batch if I go too far. So I'm gonna just add a few more drops of water. And the best way I can explain it is it's like maybe half and half. So if this were heavy cream, the original paint batch, this is a little more like half and half. It's not quite as thin as milk would be. So I'm gonna try this now. So I actually opened up my pen a bit when I cleaned it, so I'm gonna go ahead and tighten it now back to the 1/64 of an inch. And I'm going to, see, now the paint's going down really easily. So I'm gonna try it, test it out on the side. You can do, have some scrap paper nearby. I'm just gonna do it on my margin, which I know is gonna be cut off. And I'm just gonna kind of play with the thickness. This is a brand new ruling pen, so I haven't used it before, so I'm just kind of seeing, okay, so this looks like it's about the right consistency, and I just need to open it up a little bit more. Okay, the other thing is you want to make sure this is at least filled 2/3 of the way, because I want to have enough paint that I can do my entire line in one pass, because if you stop in the middle, it's hard to get it to line up. Okay, it's a little stubborn. And I'm gonna just clean this off a little bit with my paper towel. And again, test it. Now what I'm gonna do is line up my steel ruler along the pencil line, and I want to just be a little bit below the pencil line so that the paint line falls exactly on the line. And I'm going to start exactly where I want to start, because I don't want to go, I want this to be accurate and I don't want it to bleed over. So this is not coming out perfectly. I'm having to go back over it again, which is not ideal, but it's still coming out. It's still turning out okay. And then carefully move your ruler. So you can see there, this paint's a little lumpy. I don't like that. So I'm gonna go and clean this off again with some water and my paper towel, so that it doesn't get caked up inside. I'm gonna add a little more water to my paint. I think that it's still a tiny bit thick. So, and I'm gonna go ahead and get my ruler lined up ahead of time. Okay, so slightly thinner paint. Load it up from the side. It doesn't matter so much if the paint's on the outside, as long as it's up in this area. You don't want it near the tip on the outside. This won't affect it, but I'm gonna go ahead and clean it anyway. And then test it again. And with a just slow, deliberate pace. This is not a very good ruling pen. I don't have enough paint. And carefully remove that. Now, I'm gonna, after this dries, I'm gonna go back and do the two sides, and then with a thin brush, I have a number 1 brush here, I'm gonna go back with the same gouache color and actually paint this in. I'll just go ahead and start filling it in now. So I'm going to allow this to dry. Okay, now that this first pass is dry, I'm going to come back and do my sides, my ends. So I'm just going to do a very short line there and a very short line here. Carefully remove my straight edge, and then I'm going to set my pen to the side and I'm going to fill it in with a brush. And you might need to put a second coat on depending on what medium you're working with. Usually the gouache on the ruling pen line will be opaque because it's thick. But my fill in, I'm just going a little easy. Now I'm not completely happy, I just made a mistake there. I'm not completely happy with this because it's lumpy and it might be my paint. So I'm going to do a second line now. I'll wash off my tools and be right back. Okay, I'm back for the second test. Now I'm going to work with my reddish color here, and I'm going to go ahead and separate some of my paint and water it down. I think I'm going to go a tiny bit thinner this time, so it will be a little more like milk. It does pay to have a high quality ruling pen. When I was in college, I had one that was made in Germany, and it had a really fine point. It was longer and it was sharp. And so this one seems to have somewhat of a rounded end, and the metal's quite thick. So it seems to be affecting how easily the paint comes through. So I'm going to line up my ruler, and I'm going to load the ruling pen with paint. So again, just letting gravity pull it down to the bottom of the tip, and see it's dripping out. That means it's open. It's too open. It does take a little bit of getting the hang of it. Okay, so it's coming out well, but I want to make sure I have enough paint. Oops, it's dripping out again. Okay, so making sure that my ruler's still lined up and my pen's working, I'm going to go ahead and lay down my line. Now that one came out really nice. I think that yellow paint was lumpy. Now also, another thing to notice is how I hold the pen. Make sure that you're not leaning forward or leaning back away or toward you. You want to be pretty much straight up and down, parallel with the ruler. And then instead of straight up and down, you want to rotate slightly, somewhere between a 30 to a 45 degree angle. And so I'm going to start right at the pencil line, and I'm just, with a nice steady speed, I'm going to go all the way across and stop and pull my ruler away. And just be careful of any area like this that you're using for testing. So that came out really nice. So if you leave your ruling pen laying around, it is going to get dried up. So I'm just going to keep this, I'm just going to like dab it a little bit so it stays active, because I want to go ahead this time and do my sides right away. As long as I keep my ruler away from the wet paint, I can go ahead and do this edge. And then I'm going to do, I have wet paint here, so I'm going to put my ruler up like this. There. Now I can proceed with filling it in. Just going to fill in my corners first. Now that my first pass is nice and dry, I'm gonna go in now and do a second coat. I think I'm gonna try this slightly thicker paint now because that will cover a little better. Now that my first color is nice and dry, I'm gonna go in and put a second color where the lines will butt against each other. So as long as it's dry, you can just come in here, line up your ruler. I'm going to thin down my paint a little. This is still the original thickness. And again, it's something between milk and half, but you just have to play with it and just practice on some scrap paper until you get a hang of it, the hang of it. And let the gravity pull the paint down to the tip. Well, that's open too much, it's dripping. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and just confidently lay in the second color. Line it up for the next line, refill. It's working a little better with the paint just a tiny bit thinner, but you have to be careful not to have the thickness open too much or it will run out. So switching to a thin brush, I'm using a number 1 with a long sable tip. And I'm going to paint this. And this line's so thin, I can just probably paint that side edge just with my brush. So there you go. This one probably needs a second coat after it dries, but I think that pretty much covers it. Now, if I'm doing a geometric design, I would do 2 parallel lines, allow it to dry, do the 2 vertical lines, and then I would fill it in with a brush. So it's the same process. So if I had a more complex design, I would just take my time and do each section little by little. The most important thing is to make sure you've laid out your design in light pencil and measure very accurately, because everything will fall into place after that. Now when it's completely dry, you can come back with a vinyl eraser. This is a white vinyl eraser, and you'll be able to just lightly erase the pencil lines, and it won't smear the paint. So that concludes the demonstration.